Last week, the Confederation of British Industry and 41 other leading trade groups wrote to the Chancellor demanding fundamental changes to the system.
So will the Chancellor address rates in next week's budget? And if not, how convincingly can Labour reposition themselves as the party of business?
Well, joining us now is SEEMA MALHOTRA, Shadow Minister for Business and Consumers, and the MP for Feltham and Heston, who is bringing us today's Opposition Day debate.
SEEMA, you get to decide at the debate once a week as the opposition. Why have you decided that business rates are such a priority?
We are calling this debate today because it's coming on the back of an urgent need to support our high streets as the cost of living crisis also continues. But the cost of living crisis doesn't just affect consumers, it's also affecting millions of businesses up and down the country who are struggling to make ends meet after the crisis of the pandemic. That pandemic crisis is now really becoming a harder economic recovery than it should be. And as inflation continues to push up prices, as the supply chain crisis continues, as we're getting new forecasts as well from the IMF and others about showing our economic recovery at risk, there's got to be measures that we take now, particularly ahead of the golden quarter and the period next year. Businesses are finding it much, much harder to recover. That's why over 40 trade organisations also last week called for an urgent reform of the tax and the cost to businesses that are coming. So that's why today we think it's absolutely vital for tackling the cost of living crisis for consumers by also supporting businesses, because with business shortages and difficulties, prices for consumers also going up. But also that business survival is also about making sure that jobs are supported in this very, very difficult period of recovery ahead.
This is a popular idea amongst many businesses, indeed amongst many backbench Conservative MPs says that there needs to be change with regard to business rates. But there's some economic analysis to suggest that business rates are in effect a tax on landlords more than they are on businesses themselves, because there's some modelling to suggest that if business rates were scrapped or lowered or whatever, all that would happen is landlords would put up rents to match the difference. Businesses would still pay the same amount of money in ground rent, and landlords would pocket the difference. What would you say to that?
We need to have a system of modern business taxation that is actually recognising and supporting investment that goes to support productivity, new equipment, and a fairer way in which there isn't this disincentive built into the system as well. You know, there can be examples of where you make a change, you make an investment, and you end up seeing an increase in your business rates that ends up being a disincentive to what could actually be improving your output, increasing profits and therefore taxes, and also improving your productivity. So what we're saying is that there needs to be a fairer system. There needs to be a way that, you know, there's also more equity between where businesses and happening profits are being made online versus offline, because we have a huge inequality within our taxation system where you're seeing online businesses making profits without those costs and the consequences of being in our communities, being those frontline businesses in our communities, and they don't pay anywhere equal in terms of tax as well. So one of the ways in which we would want to look at this is being able to support a modern system of business taxation, but in supporting the measures we're calling for right now to pay for that by increasing the digital sales tax next year, which would go from 2% to 12%. It is a proposal that's fully costed, and it would give that much needed support to hard-pressed businesses in our communities. Look, this is also about recognising that businesses in our communities, like the one I grew up in Osterley and Hounslow, are at the front line in many ways. They are the places that people go to seek advice. They're not just economic, units of economic transaction. They are at the front line in our communities. They are the reasons that people go out and spend their money too. They are often family-led businesses as well. So that family income is tied to the business income. There are many reasons.
I think no one would disagree with you there in the need to support those small and medium-sized businesses. But with what you're saying here, raising the digital sales tax from 2 to 12%, an astronomical increase, that sounds like levelling down, not levelling up, taxing other businesses more rather than taxing smaller businesses less.
I don't think this is really to be seen in the context of that, and I tell you why. Because with online businesses that are making huge profits, and we've seen that also in terms of how consumers may have shifted some of their behaviours during the pandemic, not all of which is now seeing life return to normal. People are still worried about going out to their businesses, even though that's picking up as the economy starts to recover. There's also the situation of small businesses in supply chains affected by the supply chain crisis as well, because at the end of the tale of how products are developed and then distributed and used across the economy, there's a whole supply chain there with smaller businesses and businesses that have properties and premises where they employ people being part of that whole economic supply chain. So this is also about recognizing that as online businesses have started to make greater profits, but without the same impacts on how they give back and what they might be taxed. This is about recognizing that some of those shifts have to be responded to with a more modern business taxation system that is fairer for how businesses are working, how we need them to work, and how we would tax profits coming out of them too.
Very quickly, because we have very limited time left here, where this has been tried elsewhere in the world, where businesses online have been taxed more, we've seen some disability campaigners actually get involved, calling these a tax on disability, a tax on delivery, on people who might not be able to go to the high streets themselves. What would you say to that?
You always need to look at how you're going to do things fairly. And I do think that is an area that is important. But the similar issues have also been raised with accessibility, sometimes to local premises. That's why we brought in reforms to make sure business premises are also accessible. It's the same that we've had for workplaces. And those questions and those concerns need to be taken seriously. But some of what we're seeing is a global move towards making sure that we've got nations working together where businesses that may be trading online go.
Okay. SEEMA MALHOTRA, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Sorry, that seemed to be cut a bit short there, but we'll be sure to be following this debate more. Indeed, let's pick up on it now with Kevin Hollinrake, the Conservative MP for Thirsk and Melton, and of course chairman of the Property Research Group of MPs. Kevin, welcome to the programme. First of all, is the Labour Party stealing the Conservative Party's clothes here a bit? They're talking about helping businesses all of a sudden. How do you feel about that?
Well, there should be. Everybody should be talking about that. And what we really want to see is a fair and level playing field. That's what everybody wants to establish, get back to. The tricky thing with business rates is finding an alternative to the system we've got already. And I welcome the fact that Labour have come forward with a policy. I don't think it works for a number of reasons. The digital services tax, increasing it like that, it's just not going to work for various reasons. Number one, the international agreement on corporation tax, part of that agreement is an agreement to scrap any digital services taxes. So it's a very short lifespan. What Amazon did with the last one, they stuck the 2% charge straight on to the cost of goods. So it went straight to consumers. And in fact, it doesn't even apply to Amazon's own direct sales. As you know, Amazon sell a lot of the stuff direct to the consumers themselves. So lots of flaws with that proposal. It's not one that I think I would support.
Be voting with the opposition today. So how do you intend to get the Chancellor to act when it comes to business rates in the budget next week?
Well, it is tricky. I mean, you're talking about roughly £30 billion a year. You can't simply say we will kind of waive that. You've got to find that money from elsewhere. We've got to balance the books. Lots of talk on online sales tax. That's probably the least risky option. The trouble is with that, it's just going to further complicate the system. My own solution, the one I would like to see us adopt, is to scrap business rates completely and add a few pence to VAT, and that would create an immediate fair and level playing field right across the piece, whether you're trading online or you're trading offline. It wouldn't make any difference. You're paying the same taxes. That would be a kind of huge transformation and a huge simplification of the system, a very complex system of business rates, which has got hundreds of different reliefs and a very complex methodology of assessing the value of a property, which has to be revisited every few years. It's a much simpler way to collect taxes from business and effective consumers.
Of the Conservative Party as a party that's in favour of businesses, that's for low taxation, is slipping away. There have been a number of opinion polls that show that the country at large now no longer sees the Conservative Party as the party of low tax. How can the Chancellor turn that around next week?
Well, I don't think that's fair. You know, you've seen some huge challenges over COVID, where we put £400 billion into supporting businesses through the economy. And you've got some huge backlogs in terms of health and social care particularly. That's got to be paid for. And I think most of the people I speak to recognise that. So that's why we've had to bring in this health and social care levy. And there are some huge demographic challenges ahead: pension costs, healthcare and social care. So we're going to have to look at taxes differently. But this isn't about tax raising, from my view. It's about collecting the taxes differently, which puts a fair burden on online retailers compared to high street retailers. That's what we're trying to do. You've got to make it a fair and level playing field, and then everybody competes equally, and then the companies that offer the best service at the lowest price win, which is what we want for our consumers.
Very, very briefly, if I may, have you had a wink and a nod? You'll get some good news on business rates next week. In a word.
No.
Okay. Brilliant.
That's about the only time we've asked for an in a word answer, where we've actually got it in a word. Kevin Hollinrake, thank you so much for joining us here on The Briefing.